Good afternoon and welcome to this live stream. For those of you who are watching, we're sorry that we're a little late, but we had a very tight turnaround between the service and this recording. Today is Modern Slavery Day. That is to say, today is the day when we pay particular attention to a hidden ill in our society, which is that all over the place in almost any business you care to name, there are people being exploited at work. And here to talk about this with me is Shayne Tyler and Virgo. My name is Jessica Martin, and I am one of the clergy at Ely Cathedral, where we are marking Modern Slavery Day particularly today. Shayne is a compliance director in a leading fresh produce supplier and has been campaigning and working against the exploitation of workers for over 20 years, I think. And Caroline is director of the Clewer Initiative, the Church of England's anti-slavery movement, and is here to say a little more about what we can do to make some difference. So perhaps, Shayne, you'd like to say a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Shayne Tyler. I'm the Group Compliance Director for a large produce supplier, operates out of 54 countries and supplies major retail accounts. But frankly, my name's irrelevant, and that of the companies that I work for, because those that wish to exploit don't care which business they are infiltrating. Same as the victims, it's irrelevant who I am unless we're doing something that can really help them. As a organisation, though, I've been dealing with this now for 20 years plus.
And Caroline, would you like to say a little bit about what the Clewer Initiative is and how it came about?
Yes. So the Clewer Initiative is the work of the Church of England against modern day slavery. And we exist really to raise awareness and to encourage dioceses and parishes to identify victims of modern slavery, and then to provide some sort of victim care and support. And I think our work really began in Derby when Bishop Alistair Redfern began some work with the Police and Crime Commissioner there and set up the first statutory partnership in the country. And we followed that model of working with the police and with other charities and with the church to try and do things which are going to help to end exploitation for people.
So you're doing quite a bit in liaison with other agencies and other partners?
Yes, so the whole way that we work is by trying to create partnerships, because we recognise that this is a problem that can really only be solved at a very local level, or only solved properly at a local level. For example, it's no good me thinking about, or you thinking about exploitation in Somerset while we're sitting in Ely. It has to be the people in Somerset thinking about Somerset, the people in Ely thinking about Ely, and the police and other statutory organisations know what's happening on the ground, but they need the help of interested and active public, of which the church has many, to be able to actually help identify.
Absolutely. And your strapline is "We See You."
Yes.
Would you like to say a little bit more about why you chose that particular strapline?
Well, probably there are three reasons. The first reason is that we did actually ask the group in Derby, who Bishop Alistair was working with, what they thought would be a good strapline for us, and they came up with a whole lot of suggestions, and ultimately this was the one we liked best. And I think there were two reasons we liked it best. The first is that we know that modern slavery is a hidden crime, and that generally it goes unseen by people. And so to say "we see you" is a reminder that actually it is by looking we can see those victims. But I think for me as well, it's got a much deeper resonance for people who are of the Christian faith particularly, because we see in the Gospels that Jesus doesn't just look at people and turn away. He looks at people and sees them and has something of an encounter with them. And I think that is probably my deepest hope for the work we do, that we'll learn as the church to look at people and really respond in a way that makes a difference to their lives.
Thank you. Perhaps people watching may not necessarily know why it's so hidden. What kinds of things have you encountered that perhaps a community would not know what the signs were to notice, but could make a difference to?
So I think, I mean, Shayne talks a lot about the absence of normal, and I think that's probably something that we've come to talk about more when we've been talking to congregations about it. And I think what very often happens is that people see something, or a church person would see something, and they wouldn't really know. I mean, they sort of sense it possibly isn't right. So for example, in one of the dioceses that we're working in, I mean, I have quite a lot of phone calls from diocesan officers. I'm not an expert on these things at all, but they were talking about a Chinese woman who was working in a pub during lockdown, and there are a whole lot of questions raised about why she was there. Was she there forcibly? You know, did she have, I suppose, the status to be in this country? Because that inevitably flows from that. You know, we were able to put the diocesan officer in touch with somebody who could help to answer or to tell them what those questions should look like. And then somebody, actually one of the clergy went and made a pastoral visit, and the situation, if not resolved, was at least there seemed to be some, you know, agreement about how it should be dealt with. But it isn't often very easy to spot things, and often it's much harder to know what to do about them.
Thank you. You've recently brought out a farm app, which is very relevant to an agricultural diocese like Ely. Could you say a little bit about what the farm app can do?
Yes. So we've been very interested in the whole issue of modern slavery in rural locations, and part of the reason for that was that so one of the early statutory partnerships that I worked with, they did a piece of work looking at where their intelligence reports had come from, and what they found was that mostly they were urban reports, and there were very few reports from rural areas, even when you would think that you would see, you know, there were sort of industries there you might see exploitation in, and we're talking about sort of warehousing, food production, possibly farming. And so since then we've sort of had an ongoing low-level rural campaign, but with the whole issues around Brexit and COVID and lockdown, it seemed inevitable that there was going to be a shortage of labour for the picking season, well, both this year but probably even more next year. And so because of that, we looked at developing this app. I mean, and it's developed really on the premise that farmers or you know, people running factories, as Shayne has said, want to be compliant. They want to do the right thing, and they want to do the best thing. But very often they're not sure exactly what that is. And so this app contains information both for employers but also for employees, and tells people you know, what their rights are, what they should be looking for working in the British industry, and then what they should do if those conditions don't seem to be being met.
Thank you. That brings me very neatly and very naturally to the kind of work that you do, Shayne. Could you perhaps say a little bit about your journey to the kinds of working and campaigning that you do now?
Yeah, well, firstly, just to pick up on something that Caroline spoke about in the community. Business and the community are the same thing. As I drove here, so a journey, but for today, as I drove here today, I passed two facilities where I know that there has been national TV programmes where they have unfortunately been caught for employing illegal or slave workers. Now, in both of those cases, one 12 miles away and one 22 miles away, that has to be within our community around Ely. That does not mean that the business has done anything wrong, and it does not mean the community in and around Ely has done anything wrong. But there are criminals that operate in our communities that exploit people. And I learned, unfortunately, that lesson 20 years ago when my factory I worked for then was on Panorama for the illegal employment of over 200 staff. I still to this day say that we didn't do anything wrong, but we didn't do enough because I didn't know how to look and how to find it.
So it was something that was invisible in plain sight, in a way?
In fact, actually, I was wishing staff a good evening every day. and not one of these people had said anything to me. And yet I found that I had staff on as little as 17 pence an hour. And I also had some more serious crimes that were being taken place and perpetrated against a woman within my facility. And we had absolutely no idea. I also found very harshly that after the event, the newspapers sort of touched on it, but community didn't really care enough. And if it wasn't caring enough, who was going to do anything about it, because I couldn't look by while this had taken place in my facility. And it was then that, part of the journey, that I started finding it under every stone I was turning over. And then by the time I got to 2005, I'd overturned a criminal gang operating out of Peterborough. So again, within Cambridgeshire. On this occasion, we took 7 victims out of exploitation. We were aware of another 53 that were in a block of flats. But I received a phone call from the criminals. They knew my name, they knew my wife's name, they knew where I lived, they knew my mobile number because they'd just called it, and they knew I had 2 sons. And it dawned on me, we're not playing tiddlywinks. This is an extremely serious circumstance. So to pick up on what Caroline said, collaboration is crucial, because you can't expect any member of the public or any business on its own to operate and deal with this in isolation. It has to work together to resolve it.
So the kinds of organisations you'd liaise with, obviously the police.
Yeah.
Who else might there be?
Well, we actually have 4 duties as an employer. The first one, actually, that governs them all, is we have a duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act, because it states that we are responsible for the health, safety and welfare of employees. And if we're not taking the time to care for the welfare, we might as well go home now, because that's exactly what we're talking about today. So then when you take that position, we actually drive 4 Ps. Now, the first one is we've got to do whatever we can to prevent this from ever happening. But we're not superhuman. It's going to still happen. So then we have to prepare for those that do happen. And to prepare, we need to make sure that we're able to protect the people that we're working with, but also work with the authorities to pursue, to make sure it doesn't happen again. If I take all of those 4 Ps of prevent, prepare, pursue and protect, there's not one of those I can't do without the help of somebody else, whether that's NGOs to help protect, whether that's the government to help legislate so that we can help prepare, whether we're working with other organisations to share intelligence to prevent, whether we're implementing systems and working with authorities to help pursue. They all work together. And that's where the Clewer has had such a key app generated this year from them, because that helps us get the message into the supply chain to help them understand what their rights are, so that not only the employer but also the employee can then start taking action themselves to help protect themselves, or to help ensure that it doesn't happen to them, so they're preventing. And if they do report something, it goes to the authorities so we can pursue.
So that tells us very helpfully about how employers might make a difference. But some of the work that you've been doing with Clewer has really been about what anyone in the community, whether an employer or a member of a church or just a member of a local village, might be able to observe, and who they might be able to liaise with to make a difference.
Yeah, well, the first thing you have to understand is what the crime is. And the crime, generally in forced labour, for example, would be action, means and purpose. It's the receipt, harbouring or transportation of a person, and how they're controlled for a purpose of making money. Well, that's exactly the same model that most businesses run. But we just do it on fruit and vegetables, for example, in our case, as opposed to people. So we need to stop thinking of them, even though we have to never forget that they are criminals, but we have to treat them that actually they're running a business.
And it's a business that you're in competition with,
so
as
therefore
it were.
we've got to put them out of business.
Yeah.
And if you see something that's wrong, do what you can to put them out of business, but keep yourself safe, because they are still criminals.
Yeah.
The second thing you need to understand is that victims that are caught up in this horrendous crime, The best thing I could do to describe this, if I asked you to think of the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in your life, the thing that you are so ashamed of you wouldn't tell your nearest and dearest, yeah, then tell me. That's what we're asking.
I'm not going to do that on live stream.
Yeah, but that's what we're asking the victims to do, and they're just not going to do it. So we have to accept that they're not going to tell us. And even if 1 in 100 do, that's not acceptable. We need to be working where 100 out of 100, we are looking for it on their behalf. So if the community sees something, they can see a house of multiple occupancy. They can see people that are acting suspiciously in certain circumstances. But the crucial thing that we all can do is look for the signs. And Caroline mentioned a referral that I have to. If you look for a sign of modern slavery, it generally is the presence of abnormal. But if I know you're looking for it and I'm an exploiter, I will hide it from you. So it then becomes a hidden crime. They become invisible people. How do you see invisible people? Is to care. And the way in which you care for people is you then start seeing the absence of normal. Because I take the time to find out about you. And then I start realising that there's things in your life that aren't normal.
So it's very simple. It's really encounter you're talking about.
It is, and you've got to care. And then when you've got that information, you have to not tackle it yourself. Please do not tackle it yourself. You've got to get that to the relevant authorities that Carol and I spoke about, in that you've got to collaborate and make sure you have those links to put it through. And the Modern Slavery Helpline exists for that purpose. So if you have any concerns, well, just pick up the phone or download an app and report it through the app. There are many ways which the community can, and it was actually a member of the community in Birmingham last year that because of their phone call, 45 people were taken out of slavery.
That's really helpful. I wonder whether the two of you might say a little bit more about why you've ended up working together. What is it about a C of E initiative that is helpful in terms of identifying exploitative work within businesses?
Yes, that's an interesting question. So I think the first time I heard Shayne speak, which was probably, we were trying to remember, about 2017, I was very struck by a lot of the examples he gave of instances within your business, Shayne, where actually some workers had noticed other workers and then gone to your HR people, and subsequently they've been found either to be issues or not to be issues. And I think the story I liked particularly, I mean, I don't know if you remember this still, was the young man who they said always had the same lunch every day.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and that was something that went to HR. I can't remember whether it was
I don't mind sharing that one. Yeah, we had we have a campaign, Are You OK? Campaign. It's had many different forms over many years, but it's Are You OK? So it's to promote caring. And we had a young fellow that had suddenly stopped eating lunch. And the people around him who had received training noticed and said, this isn't, there's a concern going on here. And they reported it. And we did some background checks and weren't concerned, actually. Everything was suggesting that everything was normal, but we clearly had a welfare issue going on. So we had a chat with this young man, and he went on to tell us that he had been left with a debt, was his girlfriend had returned back home. And I said, okay, but your work colleagues are concerned, do you mind if I inform them? And he said, no, of course not. So I did. About 3 weeks later, he came to see me and said, Shayne, you're going to have to ask them to stop. I can't eat it all. If we are actually in a circumstance where we are caring for the people around us enough, then exploitation struggles to exist because we're taking that time. And in fact, actually, it's an important part of how the whole process and linking with the Clewer goes. Many of our businesses operate in rural communities. We don't have one city within 25 miles of any of our facilities. We are 3 miles away from any town, but in every case, we've got a church within a mile. So if we want to collaborate, we know there's a place of safety if I needed to get somebody.
So churches are on the ground in a way and are still
Absolutely.
Local in the way that lots of the things are not.
Yes, especially in the rural context.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know. Can I ask you both a little bit about what difference it's made since the pandemic, what difference lockdown has made to the way that these businesses are operating and the way that how much access we are able to have to what's happening?
We know that within business and supply chains that we've seen more welfare issues.
Right.
So there are more people out of work that are trying to share the limited work that's available. So they're getting 1 or 2 days work a week. And therefore we've seen more welfare issues, more people that can't afford lunch. So one of our businesses, 2 of the employees spotted that, actually cared for this gentleman, made sure he was okay, passed on all the relevant details, his welfare was covered off. But we need to also reward them, because within a business that's identifying that. So yeah, that month, it was the month of August for one of our businesses, they had 2 employees of the month that month, and it was for these 2 people that just took a moment to care about somebody else who literally just could not afford to eat. And we've got to find these vulnerable people in our community.
Thank you. In the Clewer, it's made a different kind of impact, I think, hasn't it? The kinds of things that are coming to you.
Yes, so I think so. At the beginning of the pandemic, we tried to think about or to observe what was happening so that we could give information to some of the people working in the diocese. And what we were told by both the Modern Slavery Helpline and by Crime Stoppers, that the number of calls had plummeted, and so they were getting really no referrals. But instead they were getting more calls from the potential victims themselves. And this has since been confirmed by the Salvation Army, who found that during the first month of lockdown, so March, April, the numbers that were actually applying to go into the government safe house system dropped to the lowest level ever since the system was introduced. I mean, it has started to climb up since then. But I think that one of the things that people were telling me from all around the country was that if you're in modern slavery, or if you're being exploited, you become more vulnerable in a situation where there's general national vulnerability for various reasons. And so we had reports, for example, in one diocese that they'd picked up a group of 6 people from a closed car wash that had come in to access food in their food bank, and they'd actually reported that to the police. I mean, I think the Church of England, and probably other churches as well, have done a fantastic job during the last few months actually trying to help people who are in difficult situations, and that will obviously have a direct intersection with modern slavery. So I think, it's just trying to keep people aware and give them, in this time when we're all feeling very tired and dispirited, to try and give them just that little bit of extra encouragement to actually take time for the person in front of them and to think about what their situation really is.
Would you be able to say a little bit more about that liaison with food banks? Because as I understand it, one of the problems is that if criminal gangs know that they can send people to food banks, then they don't even need to feed their people.
Yes, so it's not even, if food banks is one. Also, I suppose the homeless services are as I say, it's difficult, in a mess at the moment. But we've done a lot of training, because we know that many church people, as well as many non-church people, volunteer in food banks, volunteer in homeless shelters, in other sorts of social action work, and we know that people come in, that they are being used by victims to access food when they haven't got any. And so what we've done is, we've got some very basic training packages so that all the volunteers within those situations know what they need to do if they encounter somebody. And the thing is, it sounds very obvious when you say it like that, but when I began this job in 2017, I did a lot of work, sort of talking to smaller church groups, and it was extraordinary that for the first 6 to 9 months, every time you mentioned something like this in a group, they would say, oh, we wouldn't do anything about it because this is a confidential space, we can't report it to the police, we can't tell our manager. And so I think now that that's changed, that people will train volunteers, and part of the training of volunteers to spot it is actually they know they need to tell their manager, and that manager then knows they need to escalate it. But I think we have to be vigilant and keep looking, and because it's everybody's job really to try and spot people.
So in fact, a food bank can also be, or a homeless service can also be an opportunity because it's a place of encounter.
Yes.
In the way that you were talking about.
Well, it's a human crime. So the way in which you're able to identify a human crime is interacting with another human.
Absolutely.
And just to put it into context of why it's so important, we've all enjoyed a beautiful service today. We are making choices of what we want to go do. You just think of every single decision you've made in the past 24 hours. These people don't have those choices that we all take daily for granted.
Yeah.
So I think we have a duty to just go out there and engage with other human beings and realise that some of these people aren't getting choices, and we must do something.
We are coming towards the end of our time, but I wonder whether each of you might just say what you think a good first step might be for any church group that was wanting to make a difference in relation to modern slavery.
For me, there's loads of modern slavery partnerships that are operating all around the UK that may or may not have already engaged with the faith groups. What should happen is you really need to be engaging with those. Start that journey of learning and understanding and gathering information with what might be happening in your local community and see how you can be part of the solution. That's
really helpful, thank you. Caroline?
I might give a slightly more nuanced answer to that, if that's all right, Shayne. I mean, Shayne's quite right about doing that, but I'm very much a fan of group action. And so there are many dioceses now around the country are actually working with us. And so I think I would encourage you to contact the person who runs the social action or the mission in your diocese to see if they are one of those. If they're not, then ask them to get in contact with us. And if they are, ask them what you can do to help. And then we can have a really strategic, organised response. But hopefully by all of us working together, it's going to make a difference.
Thank you. Today is St. Luke's Day, and St. Luke is the gospel writer who particularly shows Jesus engaging with the marginalised, the oppressed, the abused and the exploited with compassion and attention. So it's most appropriate that it should also be Modern Slavery Day today. If there is something that you feel you can do in your community, we hope that we have helped you know what your first step might be. Thank you very much indeed, Shayne and Caroline.
Thank you.